Hi, I'm Karate, and welcome to part 2 of the discussion on The Year of Finding Memory by Judy Fong Bates. Jason brought up topics of family, identity, and memory, and I'm going to touch on all of those as I just kind of react to the book. I feel like this book specifically, for me, it's kind of hard to discuss individual topics without referring to specific incidents in the book or summarizing chunks of the book. I'm going to kind of jump around a bit, and then in the end I'll just kind of summarize my thoughts. I sort of want to preface the discussion in the same way that Jason did. This is a work of creative nonfiction. This is her version of the story of her parents. That said, I didn't find the book to be the story of her parents, according to her. I found it to be the story of her trying to discover the story of her parents. But ultimately, her quest was to know or understand her parents better and to discover if you can ever really know your parents. She admits at the end of the book that she's failed. She doesn't feel closer to her parents. She feels like she knows less about them at the end of the book. I think maybe part of the reason why she failed is one, because I don't think you can ever really know your parents. But I also don't think she really even tried to understand her parents. She knew her parents as they were in Canada. Lonely, defeated, bitter, hardworking, and quarrelsome. That was all she knew of her parents. I think she had hoped that maybe going to China would provide her with some perspective, allow her to learn a little bit more about who her parents were before they came to Canada, and then use that information to understand why they were the way they were while they were in Canada. Maybe that would allow her to understand their identity versus her identity. Their identity was, Chinese, distinctly Chinese, whereas she felt Canadian. And she says at one point, "You need to be away from your homeland to really understand its hold on you." This is totally true. It was true for me, at least, and it seemed to be true for her parents and for her. Everything her parents did was for family, including family that had remained in China. And when Judy Fong Bates arrives in China, she says she feels less like her brothers, who feel like it's a homecoming, and more like her husband, her white husband, Michael. They feel like tourists. She feels like a tourist. She doesn't feel like she's going home. And it's not until she goes to a small town where she learned she was born, and not actually what her documents say, that she feels some sense of home or belonging or familiarity, which I think is something that everyone can kind of relate to, or most people probably. If you return to the place of your birth, you feel some connection, whether it's because you expect to, or you want to, or you feel like you have to. You just feel something that's a little bit different. She goes to China twice, and on her first visit she hears nothing but great things about Canada, called Gold Mountain, as well as her father and her mother. She's bothered by these ideas that they have that Canada was some utopia for her parents, and the streets were paved with gold, and they were well off, and all this other stuff, because that wasn't the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation was that they were poor, they faced racism, they lived in a small town, so there wasn't even a Chinese community. She's especially bothered when a lady tells her, and her sister tells her, that her mother chased her father. She never knew her parents and when they liked each other, if they ever did like each other. For some reason, she's just not able to accept this. She just brushes off any information that doesn't fit with what she knew of her parents or what she experienced with her parents. I think to some extent is normal. I think everyone wants to feel like we know our parents, or that we know our parents better than anybody else. But I also think she's being a bit naive, and especially at her age, to be doing that, to be rejecting other people's memories and feelings and experiences as invalid because they don't match up with hers. Along with this kind of defensive, well, what do you know kind of attitude that she has in regards to her parents. She wants people to know what life was really like for her parents in Canada, with the racism and the loneliness and the isolation, how unhappy they were together, and how hard they had to work for so little. I would try to discover more about them, and in doing so, dispel the mythology that had grown around them. My parents were decent, hard-working people whose lives deserved to be honored in a truthful way, not tainted with fabrications. This kind of bothered me a little bit. It's this really dismissive attitude of, I know best, dismissing other people's memories because it doesn't sync up with her experiences or her memories. Therefore, it must be fabrication. And it bothered me for another reason. being that despite her commitment to being truthful, she never tells her family in China what life was like for them in Canada. She doesn't tell them that her father killed himself. She never tells them how hard everything really was for them. I think she decided not to do that because what good would that do? Who would that serve? Then why would she need to dispel the mythology and the fabrications if she's not going to even tell her family, who are the people who, according to her, have all these false impressions? And then she turned around and wrote a piece of creative nonfiction, so clearly just getting the facts out and setting the record straight was not her priority. The priority was the story. And nothing she learns changes or changed or could change what her parents were to these people. She can't somehow alter their memory of her parents, and she can't change her memories either. She can't somehow remedy her bitterness and resentment by learning that her parents did actually love each other, or at the very least had a mutual respect for each other at some point. And at the end of the book, she says she actually feels like she knows them less. Getting more information only wound up being more confusing to her. And this was one of the big points for me, which is that no two people share the same memory of an experience or a person. And I'm not sure why she can't accept that, or that she wouldn't accept it. She's so annoyed that they've created this mythology around her parents. She doesn't acknowledge that it's extremely possible that they've romanticized the whole moving to the West thing and their life in Canada, which her mother certainly helped with her portraits. She doesn't accept that they could have done this as a way to cope with being left in China, to cope with the idea of never seeing them again. And it was on the second visit, really, that she learned more or less that what everyone said of her parents was true. Her mother and father thought family was the most important thing in the world. They're always sending money back to China and going without so that they could do that. Back in China, her parents were heroes to the community, but she didn't know them that way. Other families produced heroes who performed fantastic feats, prevailing against all odds. With my parents, there were no fantastic feats. With them, it was never what they gave me, it was about what they gave up. They helped a lot of family members in a big way. One of her cousins says that the money her mother sent probably kept them from starving. She didn't really realize what kind of impact her family had had on the community back in China until her second visit. She was a bit envious of the family left in China, that connection that they seemed to have with her siblings and her parents and the community. But again, on this second visit, she's bothered that they think it was easier in Canada. She didn't feel like she was going without. She didn't feel like she was missing out. And now she's looking back at her childhood and her life with her parents. Just goes on about why didn't her father try to make it easier on himself and her family. When I think about his choices after he arrived in Canada, it becomes evident that getting rich was never a real possibility for him. He had no talent for making money. He only understood hard and grueling work. Throughout the book, there's this tone of resentment. She keeps her perception and her memories to herself, even though that was sort of her aim, was to make people see the truth of what life was really like. It just seems so weird to me that she was specifically bothered by what the family in China thought, and she never told them. She's telling everybody else, but not the people who have these notions. As I said before, I think part of the reason why she didn't tell them was because it wouldn't really serve them any good, but again, it doesn't make sense because that was her whole purpose in this journey, was to get rid of this myth, and they're the only people who have these ideas. One of the reasons she doesn't want to tell people about her father's suicide is that she doesn't want to deal with the shame that goes with that, and she doesn't want to put that on them. And this is where I may go off on a little rant. That is something that really bothered me. Why could he not give us the gift of a peaceful ending? What an incredibly self-absorbed, selfish thing to say. And maybe it's because I have personal experience with this, not my father committing suicide, but a member of my immediate family. So that is probably informing my opinion on this a little bit. There's always this, why did this happen? What could I have done to prevent this? And did I do something to contribute? Did I make them feel this way? Some guilt, but to say something full of that kind of entitlement and self-centeredness. Why did this happen to me? And yes, you could argue that suicide is selfish, but that's not the point. Her father was in his late 70s when he killed himself. He worked away his entire life doing, as she said, grueling work to give her opportunities that he never had, opportunities that she never would have had in China, while helping the family that he had left in China. including some children and his nieces and nephews. He was extremely unhappy. He was in an unhappy marriage. They were constantly fighting. Life was really hard for him. He had left children in China, had never seen them again. His life in Canada was so difficult. The racism and humiliation and other things. But she's only sort of skimmed the surface on it. She didn't really explore that very much. She just seemed to want him to tough it out until he died of natural causes. You know, this couldn't he have had the decency to wait sort of thing that she's saying here. And then her speculation as to why he may have done it just seems so far off base to me and just incredibly dense and naive. Was this the only way of making sure he would be remembered? To me, that just kind of illustrates this lack of understanding. This is not something that I understand, and it infuriated me when I read it. It is a tremendous amount of sadness that someone has to feel in order to actually end their life. I could never think about the person close to me who killed himself and not think of that, to think of the amount of pain they must have been in to do that, and then to say, why couldn't you have just dealt with it? Why couldn't you have just waited? She just sweeps it under the rug. Anyway, moving along. In the end, she doesn't have all of her questions answered. Why didn't they move to a city with a Chinatown sooner? Which is something I was really curious about, and it's weird because she brought it up a few times and then she never actually addressed it. Surely moving to a city with a Chinatown would have decreased, at the very least, the amount of isolation they felt. To conclude, I just want to say that I don't think it's a story of discovery and discovering her parents. I think it's a story of her discovering that you can never really know someone, and sometimes having more information doesn't help, and sometimes secrets are secrets for a reason, either because they're too painful or it's not going to help anyone. And in finding this information and discovering that all of her relatives are right, I think she sort of learned that just because someone's memory doesn't match up with your memory doesn't make it invalid and doesn't make it wrong. Memory is not a concrete thing. It is extremely unreliable. It is extremely variable. No. I think that though this story and this experience isn't something that everyone can share, there are aspects of the story that are kind of universal. I really did appreciate learning about her parents and their life in China and as immigrants in Canada, and I wish there had been more discussion of what that was like for them. I would definitely like to read more nonfiction by Chinese Canadians relating to immigration, what it was like growing up, and just their experiences, because it's not something that I know a lot about. It's not something I've read a lot about. And learning about her responsibilities, which is probably part of her resentment of sort of being forced to act as the adult because her parents didn't speak English, so she was doing all of these things that adults do, like filling out tax forms and talking to officials and going to department stores and paying bills and all that stuff. Her life is just a regular Canadian kid who goes to church, plays with her friends, watches TV, and then her life as the child of Chinese immigrants. They're so different, and it was really interesting. I wish that had been explored more. It's the end for me. Don't forget that this month we are reading Fifth Business by Robert Davies. It's a Canadian classic. You can read along with us and then join the discussion next month. I can't wait to hear Jessica's thoughts on this book and the themes that Jason brought up, her reaction to some of the more interesting questions in the book. Stay tuned for that because it's coming. Thanks for watching. Bye.